that you are in the media, you deal with these matters, you've interviewed a lot of people, you've dealt with the newspapers as they've reported the matter and all of that. Are you able to give us a summary of what this whole Woyome Gate issue is about? Where did it start? Where are we now? What is the picture?
Well, thanks, Nyade. I guess that very difficult to summarize it, but I'll try. There was an Auditor General's report, and in that report we had judgment debts. And I guess that going through the reports, there was a name Woyome. Obviously, that was a popular name in view of issues of the World Cup in 2010, Game and Fonka. You recall that a few days before the Sunyani Congress, he had an advertiser's announcement that he signed, taking on Mr. Rollins and the wife and all that ahead of that thing. He's chairman of NBSSI. People say he's associated with the Heroes Fund. I'm yet to find that out. Obviously, somebody who's in the news is not shy to call into radio programs, especially sports and political programs, to speak. So that's obviously a well-known voice and face. And obviously, when his name was by some 41 or 51 million, a lot of people were quick to ask what the issue was. And incidentally, it had to do with a debt which is related to an event that occurred when the opposition was in power. And so obviously, the people in opposition would themselves know exactly what they did. And obviously, if they didn't deal with any such person and didn't have a contract with him, will raise eyebrows. Vocal MP, Kennedy Ejepon, went out from radio station to radio station. Fortunately, unfortunately for him, there were a few times that he had Mr. Woyome himself on the other side to battle it out. I mean, it sometimes got very hot and all that. But I guess that at the point, we all went for the Auditor General's report. We looked at it. We decided to check out what the information was. And there were a lot of startling revelations with respect to this thing. And the issue was simple, whether he was deserving of the amount or not, and whether the people who were entrusted with the public purse had done a diligent job in ensuring that, indeed, they had actually secured our taxes, in that they had given to people deserving of monies from the state, and made sure that indeed these people duly deserved what they got. And I guess that it started from there, and a lot of accusations, counter-accusations. He himself decided to hold a press conference at which he decided not to take questions after he had spoken for well over an hour. Beyond that, he went on radio programs. I was on at least one where after he spoke and was going to be asked questions, he said he didn't call to answer questions, but it was just to speak to the issues. We went on and on and on, and then it became apparent we had Matiamidu's amended statement, where now you had the government going to court to call him a fraudster per the amended statement in court. And then the president called upon to deal with the issue. He gave it to EOCO. We knew that there were divergent opinions as to whether that was the appropriate platform, in view of the fact that it was an Auditor General's report and was before Parliament and was due to go before the Public Accounts Committee. Obviously, the president exercised his authority. People also exercise their democratic right to express divergent views to what the president thought was appropriate. The EOCOs presented their interim findings. The police have decided to act. I'm not too sure whether they are acting on the EOCO report or they are acting on something else. But at least we know that people have been picked. Some people spent the weekend in cells. They've gone to court, asked for the people to be remanded. The court has granted it till the 13th. Along the line, the activities of a company called Waterville has also now come up and is in sharp focus. And it appears that they also played a role in terms of the final determination of whether Woyome should be paid or not, because initially there was a conflict between the two parties. I recall that Mr. Woyome's first letter, in terms of any claim in this matter, was first of all to dispute the claim of whatever for 33 million, to describe it as exaggerated and say that they deserved only 5 million, that he and 3 other companies also deserved 6 million. That was in 2009. In a few months, there's 6 million euros.
Right.
In a few months, the 6 million became 105. In fact, it became 20 something, then went to 40 something. He ended up at 105 with all manner of calculations, LIBOR, Forex rate, Eurobor, all those things came up. I mean, I guess those are financial engineering terms. So they all came up to those issues. So this is where we are. I hope I've done a good summary.
I think so. I believe that you've done a fantastic summary of the issues, and I can actually see is applauding you. And if we were to deal with the whole Woyome issue at large, trust me, I'm sure we'll need 10 hours to do that. So a lot of the discussion will center around the interim reports of EOCO. And of course, there are issues flying from that point that we will deal with. But Doc, you have a copy of the interim report right in front of you. And before the program started, you were going through it. I'm sure you've read it word for word.
I've read it several times.
Several times?
Yes.
What do you make of this report? And was it the right way to go for EOCO to investigate this matter and to come out with this report?
Well, when this issue broke, it was in Canada turning to some business. And I remember reading about it on the internet, and I became alarmed because of the nature of the system in which we live. And so I wasn't particularly surprised that over the past several months, the issue has generated so much public attention and interest and has captured almost the imagination of every Ghanaian. For obvious reasons, as Randy rightly narrated. You know, this is an individual who is obviously known, quite popular, and had relationships with both the previous and the current government. So in that context, it was quite obvious that anything to do with him was going to generate a lot of controversy and debate, and different groups will be trying to apportion blame. And if you remember, the minority was very vocal at the beginnings of this issue, and even they held a press conference around it. And so my sense was that the president had the need to initiate a process that would allow him to get a better sense of what the response was going to be in the interest of the public.
Was EOCO, to your mind, the best process?
In the circumstances, yes. Because, I mean, there are two schools of thought. There is a school of thought that says that perhaps we should have been patient to allow the courts to look into the matter, since the case had gone back to court as per the government going back and seeking to challenge even this payment in itself. But there's also the other school of thought which suggests that given the level of interest and accusations and counter-accusations, it was only fair for the president to seek an interim way of assessing the situation to inform him of the right course of action. So in that context, I think that going to EOCO was the right thing to do. Certainly, we now know that there is a civil dimension and there's likely a criminal dimension. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to pretend.
But what do you make of the report, which you have read several times?
Having read it, I think that it is a report that is credible. It gives at least the ordinary Ghanaian a better sense of what happened and what went wrong, and also gives them the hope that in spite of the fact that something may have gone wrong, it is possible to correct the wrong that has been done. So in that sense, I think that this was the right course of action.
Ace, let me bring you into the discussion, and for good reason, I wanted to ask you the third question, so as it were, because there's a lot of legalities involved in this whole thing that we are discussing, and we'll be getting to it. I actually have a copy of the this is the Superior Court of Judicature, Friday 9 July, before His Lordship Mr. I.O. Tanko Amadou J. And if we have time, we'll be happy to have you take us through a few of the points in there which I believe are of interest. But staying with the report for now, to your mind, was that the best way to go? And what do you make of the report?
Was that the best way to go? That's difficult to answer, because then it suggests that all other ways were not appropriate or suitable, or this was the best among a number of options. It was definitely an option. It threw up a few legal questions, some of which people went to court to address. For me, and the questions about the exact status of EOCO as against the Attorney General's office, and whether, in view of numerous sections of the EOCO Act which demand a close collaboration and indeed places EOCO under the administrative supervision of the Attorney General's office, it was the most appropriate place for this matter to go to. I don't think that question has been answered yet, and I'm not sure that the interim report, and this is critical, it is interim, that the interim report addresses that yet. There was a second issue which was legal in nature, that if you looked at Section 2 of the EOCO Act, which states the objects of EOCO. Let's go back to Section 1. Section 1 establishes EOCO as a corporate entity. Section 2 states the objects of EOCO. As you know, the objects of a corporate company, a corporate entity, sets the bounds within which it operates, which means that any activity that it does outside the bounds of its objects will be ultra vires. Good. That section lists two objects. One, preventing organized crime. Preventing and investigating organized crime. Two, facilitating the seizure of assets purchased with crime proceeds. This obviously, we wasn't looking at the second one. The first one says preventing and investigating organized crime. And organized crime, as you know, is not a crime. It is a crime that occurs under certain circumstances. And the act itself defines it as a repeated crime by two or more persons. It will appear to me that either our parliament didn't take a critical look at the act and gave the entity a name that was broader than its remit, or it gave it a smaller remit than the name suggests, and limited it to organized crime, so that it will suggest that, except to the extent that the crime being investigated fits within the purview of organized crime, then there may be jurisdictional questions where EOCO is concerned. And if that is the case, then there were issues as to whether they indeed had proper legal status to investigate a matter like this, unless we are saying that this amounted to organized crime, and that would be quite a stretch. So these were jurisdictional issues that arose. But for will or for woe, they did their work. And I suspect that this is what informed their being able to exercise their power to compel the attendance of some of the people who refused to go, and even refused to go to court. One would have expected that EOCO then would have triggered its powers under the EOCO Act to compel their attendance and to go for the documents. But it did not. Which suggests to me that, one, there was a time crunch, and then probably they themselves felt that this was a bit, dicey. But for will or for woe, they did work and came up with what they themselves have termed an interim report, which means that they admit that time constraints, etc., and that's it, say refusal of people to appear, they have not been able to cover all bases. And I think we must accept that although this is a good start, it hasn't covered all the bases. There are many things that have been in the public domain for weeks that EOCO did not consider at all. And look, EOCO begins to talk about the whole issue of the termination of the bid process involving VAMED.
Yes.
Okay, let's deal with that.
Okay.
We know as a fact that VAMED, before the bid process ended, and correct me if my facts are wrong, purported to assign its interest to Waterville. This was before the bid process had ended. We are looking at Ghana law. Yes, you and I know
that during the process of the tender,
yes,
VAMED assigned its rights and responsibilities under the tender bid to Waterville Holding. That's what it says on page 3.
There should be a beep there. VAMED purported. I'm saying there should be VAMED purported to assign, because under our law, Section 7 of the Contracts Act, a person may only assign a vested legal right. There is no valid assignment under our law unless what the person is assigning is a vested legal right. It means that a right has accrued to you. Now, the question we ask is that at that stage of the bidding process, under Section 64 and 65 of the Public Procurement Act, had any right vested in VAMED to be assignable? My answer is no.